This is chapter 22, The Revolution in Energy and Industry. This is really the chapter at the beginning of the modern economic age in Europe, which is going to spread to the rest of the world, the beginning of the factory system and mass production, and the end of farming life, agrarian life in Europe, the end of the putting out system and cottage industry and all the things that we studied first semester. And now you have mechanized industrial production that we certainly live with in our generation and our age. And it starts here in about 1750. So let's get the dates written down. This is a process. It's not a single event. It happens over about 100 to 150 years, starting in about 1750, and it had fully accomplished its peak by about 1850. So get those dates written down at the top of the note somewhere. And then let's get right into section 1, the Industrial Revolution in Britain. This starts again around 1750. So England is the leader in the Industrial Revolution, and this is a new thing in history. No other country had industrialized yet. There had been the agricultural revolution starting in the Netherlands and England, which revolutionized the way people farmed and were able to grow food. But this is a first, going all the way back to prehistoric times. The second thing to keep in mind as we study this is that the historians often call this the dual revolutions, two revolutions happening at once. The French Revolution was happening in 1789 to 1790, 99, about 10 years, and then if you include Napoleon, 20. That's the first of the two dual revolutions, and the second, of course, is the industrial. So in France, there's political revolution happening at the same time as in England, there's economic and industrial revolution happening. So this is two momentous things occurring at the same time, one economic, one political. And people say this is really the beginning of the modern world. Now you have, after 1820, there's no going back. The old ways of life are over. Okay, so why does it start in England in the 18th century? And so here's the list of factors that are the reasons why it occurs in England. Number one, England had a very large colonial empire, which allowed it to trade with places all over the world. Remember, they built up their colonial empire through war. They beat France a lot. America was part of this at this point. So when there's a lot of colonies, you have a lot of markets, places to trade and do business with. So colonial empire is increasing, which leads to increasing markets. And as we learned in a couple chapters ago, the British got control of the slave trade from Spain, the Asiento, in one of the wars of the 1600s. So now that Britain, they had that in their favor. And then take a look at these maps here. England is an island, of course, and so everywhere in England they're close to water, and there's a development of waterways or canals. And so this makes doing business, navigating trade very, very easy. All parts of England at this point, around 1750, were within 20 miles of a navigable waterway. So when you're talking about advantages that your country has to do something with production and trade, England certainly was in the lead. And then one other thing to add to this list, incredible natural resources. Look at this list of things that are just under the earth in England or growing on the earth, whether it's coal, iron ore, cotton, or being able to grow these things, coal fields. The country was well blessed to be the leader of the Industrial Revolution just by nature. And then lastly, tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imports or taxes on goods to try to prevent other things from coming in from other countries. England had no internal tariffs, which means you could trade with other parts of the country remarkably easy. Okay, so we already had the agricultural revolution. Moving on to number 2 here. That had already occurred in the Netherlands and England, which led to an increase of crops and lower prices. So now people have eaten better, they're healthier, and they have extra money to spend. And so now there's going to be money to spend on industrial goods. So people's lives that already experienced one revolution with no longer needing to be farmers for their living and subsistence, and now they've had some odd jobs, they've become cottage workers, maybe moved into a city, and now you've got some extra cash and you can buy some things that you never could buy before. Other things that advantages of Britain, a central bank. so that people could have loans. Stable government. Never underestimate the stability of England. They're the most advanced political system in the world at this time, 1750. They've undergone the Glorious Revolution, 1688. Remember that? Where William and Mary became king and queen and led to a constitutional monarchy being established where the middle class is protected. People have political liberty, economic liberty. Really, if there is no glorious revolution, we probably wouldn't have the Industrial Revolution occurring in England first. So, a stable government leads to a stable economic system. That's the whole idea. And they are, of course, with Adam Smith, they're the pioneers of the free market economy in England, also known as capitalism. And so you have people with that entrepreneurial business spirit ready to move. Lastly, labor. There's abundant labor in England. Those people ready to work, some skilled, some unskilled, but there was a large population in England going back to the population explosion of the 18th century, ready to work and now well fed. And so all the ingredients are there to make Industrial Revolution happen in England. The first factories occurred in the textile industry. Got it? Textiles, where there was a couple of key inventions put out by these guys, Hargreaves and Arkwright, that really put an end to the putting out system or cottage industry, and it transformed that from making cloth in your home to these moving the whole operation into big factories. So it starts with the spinning jenny. Remember, this was by Hargreaves. This is the spinning jenny. That you could have this in your little cottage, maybe one or two of these. But now, if you got a bunch of them, they can't fit in your cottage anymore. So you start having to look for bigger places to do your work. This is the transition to the factory system. This is mechanized spinning of cotton. Arkwright's water frame is really like the first factory technology, and it's powered by water power, not manual. And this actually, Arkwright is the guy that started the first textile factory in England with 1,000 people, and he had a whole row of these water frames, probably several rows of these things going all the time, spinning cotton so that you can make textiles, clothing out of this. So this is kind of the spinning jennies, the revolution of the cottage industry, but the water frame is the first thing that really revolutionizes and starts the factory system. So let's take a look at Richard Arkwright's factory. This is the first factory in England. This got his name right on it, Richard Arkwright and Company. Look at that building. It looks remarkably like some other buildings that you might have seen in your life. To me, it looks like an old high school from like 100 years ago, which of course, most public schools have been modeled in some degree on the factory system. So here's the England's and really Europe's first factory. And this is another picture of it. So right away, they realize that people are better. It's easier to get people to work in your factory if you give them a place to live. So a lot of people got housing on the campus of the factory. And so you lived and work all right there. Save time, save energy, so you can work longer and harder hours. Of course, you want to put your factories right near water. So the Arkwright's factory was located on a canal or a stream, so you can use that for the new water power inventions that are occurring. And you can also get your products out, like we said, everywhere in England's close to water. So you get your factory out, or you get your stuff out in the water and get it into the rivers, and you can start trading quickly. So there it is. There's Richard Arkwright's factory in England, the first. All right, so what are the consequences of the beginning of the factory system in England, which starts with textiles, is you have cheaper cotton, which leads to cheaper clothing, and it's really like a revolution in the way people dress. And for the first time ever, you have people being able to purchase undergarments. They called it body linen at the time. We call it underwear. But can you imagine a society where for thousands of years no one really wore undergarments, and that because it was too expensive? And it was like a luxury item. So now people are more hygienic, they're safer, they're more comfortable. It's a whole thing, right? So the little things like this become an outcome of the first cotton factories. The wages of the weavers go up. The people making these things in Arkwright's factory, they're getting paid, not a ton, but everyone's making more money now because there's business to be had. And here's a negative side effect. Child labor. People started realizing very quickly, these early factory owners, that if we could put little children down in these factories, they can work, do things that adults can't do, like reach their little fingers into tight places. where if the machine is broken and something pops off, the little child puts his hand in there and can fix it. So there's this really dark side of the Industrial Revolution that happens immediately. First the factories and the cotton goods, and that's all great, but one of the negatives is that they started putting kids in there. And where do they get them? From the orphanages. There was lots of orphan children. Remember, we learned about that in chapter 20. And so children without parents. And so these factory owners will go to these orphanages or the foundling hospitals, and they'll say, hey, we'll essentially buy the children. We say that they say they're going to take care of them in these factories and give them education and housing, but in reality it got pretty bad. It became abusive. So we're talking kids that are even 5 to 6 years old. Get some of these statistics down. 5 to 6 years old, working 6 days a week, 13 hours a day for no pay. So this is truly slave labor. Look at this little child strapped to a coal car and dragging it up out of a coal mine. So it's terrible. So right from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, you have these questions of ethics, and the rich are getting richer and the workers and the children are being abused. And this is going to define the future of the modern world, this struggle between the rich and the poor. And it's going to shape everything about Europe and America. Our politics, our ways of life, our societies start with the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so by 1830, textiles, the industry has been completely mechanized. Cottage industry is over, and the whole thing is shifted toward factories. Let's go on. Section C, the problem of energy. So the Industrial Revolution is as much anything a shift in the way people had energy, where you got energy to do your work. And there's a little history here, lesson here. So for centuries, millennia leading up to this point, there's natural sources of power like plants, there's animals, there's wind, there's people, human, and your animals, and wood that was grown on the land, and water. Look at that. But then here's the big breakthrough of the Industrial Revolution: coal. Coal power, and things powered by coal become just fantastically off the charts. And look at this in terms of what you can do with coal and what you can power with it is so much more than what you can do with your own hands or your cattle or your donkey or whatever. So lack of power lay at the heart of poverty. This was, for most of European history, that's the truth. Not enough power, you're going to stay poor forever. Your people and animals are not enough. The problem with wood, there's wood being used for most of history, is that the forests are getting cut down. It's a short supply. It takes years to grow trees. And yet a lot of these forests are needed at this point to cut down and fire these furnaces. You got to have hot furnaces to make iron. And so there's going to be a shortage of wood. Can you sense some of the modern struggles here of environmentalism and conservation immediately coming to the forefront in the IR, the Industrial Revolution? So what's the breakthrough to get coal? And it's the steam engine. So the steam engine is the #1 breakthrough in terms of energy in the Industrial Revolution. And the steam engine, it's sort of a complicated relationship. You need coal powers the steam engine. And the steam engine is required to get more coal out of the ground. So draw a little connection arrow here between 1 and 2. Coal is needed for energy. It's hard to get out of the ground. It's incredibly valuable in terms of what you can burn it. You can make really hot fires, but one of the things that you can get out of this is if you can pump water out of these coal mines quickly, then you can get more coal. So there's water underground, you know that. And if you can pump all the natural water out of the ground, you can get all these coal reserves that are underneath the earth. But to do that, you need something that pumps water. That's a steam engine. So if you can get more coal, you can build better steam engines, and better steam engines get more coal. All right, so the role of the steam engine is to pump water out of the mines, in addition to a whole host of other things. This is around 1700. And Savory and Newcomen are the guys that invent the first steam engine. And I don't know exactly how it works. That's not my forte. But you heat water, it moves pistons, it moves the thing, and you can see that something can pump up and down and lift things out of the ground. All right, these are the designs for the first thing. The man that really brings the business side of life to the steam engine was James Watt. He didn't invent it. He perfected it, and he turned it into a business. He was an entrepreneur. He marketed it. He created a company that built these and sold them all over Europe. So the Savory and Newcomen are the engineers. Watt is the businessman. So this is around 1760. So about 60 years later, after these things are invented, here comes James Watt to sell them. And what is the result of having steam engines? And here's Watt's. You can look at all the different parts of it, and what you do with it, and it moves things back and forth. And this is the model of it in the museum, the first Watt steam engine. What can you do with it? Well, the main thing is you can have unlimited, nearly, power, which leads to an abundance of resources and production. And the industries that are most transformed by the steam engine are mining and in the cotton mills or textile mills, where coal and the steam engine replaces water power. Water can only get you so far. Coal and steam can take you to a whole new level. So particularly the iron industry was completely transformed. You can, with hotter fires, fueled by coal, you can actually lead to stronger building materials like iron. And so there's these changes in the iron industry where you have this product called coke, which is a stronger form of iron, and that is now able to be welded and heated and shaped and everything you need to do to get large buildings and material to make large buildings. So there's massive production increases in the iron industry, all fueled by the steam engine. So just to give you a statistic here, in 1740 there was 17,000 tons of iron being produced in England per year. By 1844 there are 3 million tons of iron being produced in England each year. So what do you do with all this new iron production fueled by the steam engine and coal? You build railroads with it. So here come the world's first railroads. You lay down the 2 tracks of iron, and now you put something on it with a steam engine that moves, and you have a train. So the first train locomotive is known as the Rocket. It's by a guy named George Stephenson. It was from 1830. It went a whopping 16 miles an hour down the tracks. It's the world's first choo-choo. And one little guy would sit up in the seat right there and operate the levers and the machinery, and there was a little engine there. That's a steam engine on wheels, and it powers the wheel and it moves down the road, and you build a bigger one over time, and you get the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, which is Europe's and the world's first railway that connected the 2 most industrially important cities in England, Liverpool and Manchester. And you can think about what do those 2 cities matter in the future. Well, the Beatles are from Liverpool, and Manchester is famous for soccer, the Manchester United. But in 1800, roughly, this is the railroad capital of the world, and this is the first train system between 2 major cities. And there's a picture of it. This is on opening day of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. So again, all this is England taking the lead. Starts with the cotton system being mechanized into factories, and then we move into coal and the steam engine, and here we have revolutions in life. So what's the impact of railroads? Shipping costs go down. The ability to sell things to farther away places, expanded markets, that goes up. Larger factories are now possible because you can make more and send it quickly. And then there's a huge demand for people to build the railroads, for unskilled workers to come and be laborers to construct them. So people have jobs now that were unemployed. So the railroads transform first English life and then all of the world. And there's an obsession with railroads. Look at these pictures, as these artists now are trying to process what's happened all around them. There's a mystique associated with the railroads and this new age, and the 2 famous painters are Turner and Monet. And these guys, we're going to study them later in the semester when we study Impressionist art and Romantic art. They glorify the railroads and these new train stations. This is like, maybe I think of an equivalent. Maybe if you were a kid today and you saw like one of these new space capsules launch that are being built today, or maybe if you'd seen a space shuttle launch, something on that scale maybe would affect people of our generation. But at this point, it's the railroad. And look at these engineers that build train stations all over Europe. This is it's a thing. It's like these are the airports of the 19th century. And so this is one in Paris, and they're these they call them the cathedrals of the industrial age, and they're magnificent. They're all over London and Paris, and they're eventually in New York. Think of like Grand Central Station in New York. So look at these things. They're huge. They're the biggest buildings of their day, and it's the center of commerce, transportation, relationships, communication. It's a really kind of cool thing. If you see a European train station today, they're pretty impressive, and most of them are still original, going back 150, 200 years. All right, so last section here, section F, industry and population. So England, as we said, is the world's leader in all this stuff. So what do? They celebrate. By 1851, they've dominated the world as the industrial powerhouse, and so they hold an exhibition called the Crystal Palace, and they build this magnificent structure out of glass and iron. So the building itself is built out of materials that are now part of the Industrial Revolution on a big scale. And they build this big, huge, exhibition structure, and they put it in the middle of Hyde Park, which is in central London. And it's going to be like a fair, an exhibition, a mall. We're going to display all of the best products that have been made of it's like a trade show kind of. Like think of like the home show at the convention center if you've ever been there. People are on display with their products. So it's this incredible thing. It's like a show, but it's also for business at the same time. In the first years it was open, 6 million visitors came to London to see the monument to the Industrial Revolution. Part museum, part shopping mall, part display, the whole thing. So here's the inside of it. The Queen of England, Queen Victoria at the time, was there to open the building. It looks like a mall actually. Look inside there. It looks like something like Tucson Mall. Anyway, so this is just it's a symbol of the Industrial Revolution itself, and it's a place for people to do business and make contracts and look at the latest technologies and inventions that have been put out, and you might want to get one for yourself. So it's an incredible exhibition. It lasted for 50 years. Finally, the thing burned down, ironically, later on, early 20th century, but it was there for a long time. And again, all this is to indicate Britain's status as what we're going to call the workshop of the world, which means they made everything. They're the producers for most of us in the world at the time. In 1850, Britain was making 2/3 of the coal for the world. They were making 1/2 of the cotton and 1/2 of the iron anywhere in the world. And they were responsible for 20% of all industrial goods in the world by 1850. So that's why we call them the workshop of the world. Look at this graph here. You can see that the UK in sort of a light purple by 1850-60 is just leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of Europe, the US, Japan. It's not even close. So they dominate world manufacturing. Workshop of the world. Their GNP, their gross national product, is the dollar value of all goods and services that are produced in England per person on a per person basis, and it increased by a factor of 4. It went up 4 times from 1780 to 1850. The population of England at that same time went from 9 million to 20 million. So there's a doubling in population, a quadrupling in production. England is the dominant world power. So there's a lot of economic historians who start writing about this. There's a lot of interest being paid to England and what's happening, these incredible rapid transformations. And the two guys you got to know are Malthus and Ricardo. Malthus came along and said, I am very concerned that the population is going to grow faster than we can feed it. Population grows faster than food supply. That's his main argument in this famous essay from 1798. And he said, this is going to lead to the downfall of civilization. We're getting ahead of ourselves. We're too many people, too many mouths to feed. And even though there's all this tremendous economic growth, it's not enough to feed us. He suggested that couples start having fewer children. He was advocating birth control long before that was a thing that people really even talked about. And so it was like a warning shot to the world. Watch out, there's a cost to progress. And so people are, you think about this, there are still issues with food supply in the world. There are issues with poverty and hunger and famine and starvation. Well, not in the Western world today, not in the US and Europe, but if you go to most other parts of the world, Africa, Middle East, Asia, you have South America, you have tremendous hunger in the world today. And people still quote Malthus and say, look, we're not able to make enough food. The West is getting all the food, but not those that really need it. Ricardo came along and talked about money and wages. So Malthus writes about people and food. Ricardo writes about wealth and wages. And he said in his famous iron law of wages. He said wages will always, in the industrial age, they'll always go to the lowest possible level. Now that we're in the factory system, there's no incentive for people to give people more money. There's now more people that have no skills that need jobs. It's a supply and demand issue. There's a large supply of unskilled workers that need jobs. So what's going to happen? Their prices of their labor are going to drop. There's more supply than there is demand. There's an abundance of people, and every time you have more of supply than demand, the prices, in this case wages, are going to stay low because now you don't need skills anymore. So you think about today, minimum wage. We have to have a minimum wage to prevent the iron law of wages from coming true. If we did not have a minimum wage, and now there's arguments on both sides whether we should have one or not, but the truth is if we didn't have a minimum wage, wages for average people without skills would be below where the minimum wage sets it. So this guy's calling for sort of a minimum wage long, long ago. Can you see why economics picks up the nickname the dismal science? Because the ideas of Malthus and Ricardo were kind of pessimistic and negative. To sum them up, he said, we're all going to starve, we're going to be poor, and then we're going to die. Those are the 3 points of Malthus and Ricardo. We're going to be poor, we're going to starve, and we're going to die in the new industrial age. So right off the bat, there's this argument of there's tremendous progress, but at what cost? In the end, were Malthus and Ricardo right? Well, not for certain parts of the world, no. In the long run, in terms of Western Europe and the U.S., and there is enough food and people are relatively wealthy, but when you think about their ideas on the world scale and in faraway places, maybe they're still sort of relevant. We'll come back next time and look at the way the Industrial Revolution spread from England to the rest of Europe.